buenos días. Muchas gracias por venir a esta conferencia que nos propuso el EPRI. Vamos a hacerlo en inglés como ya os habíamos avisado. I'm going to switch to English. Thank you for coming, all of you. This is a pleasure having you here Monday morning. This is a thing very interesting. Well, 3 months ago, con José, we have been talking to start this conference or something like this when some interesting people from EPRI came here to Spain. EPRI is the Electrical Power Research Institute, very well-known institution. Maybe Jose could introduce you, but I think more of you were in relation with them because you are working in companies in relation with EPR. And this is the first time that Jose and Maria told us to Ante, who is Senior Vice President of External Relations at Technical Resources, very large, and Chair of EPRI International as well, came here to give some issues about energy networks and efficient electrification initiatives. Well, this is the second time we have here people from the EPRI, and I hope you will be interested in the conference and in something like this. And I'll give the floor to José Delgado to introduce Ante, because José always deal with this kind of thing in the companies and the people here.
Yeah, thank you, Arcadio. So I'm José Delgado. I'm the regional manager in Southern Europe. I'm based in Madrid. I'm very close to all our members, EPRI members, that are basically utilities that participate in EPRI in our research projects and programs, and it's a pleasure to be here. And we have now the opportunity, and we had the visit of Ante, our Senior Vice President, and that was a very good opportunity to introduce some of the most relevant activities and initiatives we are launching in EPRI. So it's a pleasure to have Ante with us. And thank you, Ante.
Thank you. Thank you.
Fall or whatever you want.
A stand up?
No.
Just don't fall off?
You need yes.
Okay. All right. Well, thank you all very, very much. It's quite an honor to be here, and I'm glad it worked out so well. I want to spend a few moments just talking about some of the things that we, can you hear me okay? Okay, good. That we see coming down the future at the Electric Power Research Institute. So just a little bit, I'm going to go over these kind of potential issues. I did want to mention the context I'm coming from, because you hear about a lot of companies. EPRI was born out of a blackout in the Northeast North America where 30 million people were without power. And the United States government was going to set up another entity, another government agency, and several groups got together and said, if you create this not-for-profit public benefit company, then we will all provide funding for this research. So that's actually how EPRI was created. Oh, you're going to fix this? Oh, okay. That's how EPRI was created. So we currently We currently have over 450 members over in 30 different countries. So we've been around for about 46 years. These are the areas that we currently are doing business in. We do business in all the countries that the United States allows us to do business in. There are about 5 countries that we are not allowed to work with. And these are the areas of research. So we have technical expertise throughout the world in these particular areas. And what's really unique about EPRI is it goes all the way from where you create the electrons or the electricity or the energy to where it's used. And why that's important is sometimes you can get very siloed if you just are focused on energy storage, if you're just focused on nuclear power. So being able to look across the entire aspect of energy production gives us some unique perspectives. So what I'm going to talk about now is kind of where we've come from. All of you have been part of this entire journey, and then kind of go into where we see we are right now. So we all remember that there was a grid, there was production of power, and it provided that energy and electricity to the customer. And then we had the renewables and the distributed energy resources, and that grid that was created for one-way power flow became two. We've all been there, we know that. And the idea for the integrated grid was to enable the value of that renewables and distributed energy generation. But the world moved on, and as we had more advances in information and communication technology, we'd come to a place where we saw the integrated energy network. This is what EPRI calls it, and you see most people have adopted this. What that means is that all of that information and communication advances, the digital activities, the data analytics, the sensors, have allowed the different energy networks to become interdependent. So just because it's electrons not moving and connecting with each other through a wire, you now have molecules and bytes of information and MMBTUs of gas, and you can no longer just look at one energy source and anticipate how it's going to be used or how it's going to be connected. So the idea of the integrated energy network is now we look at the customer. I don't know how many times in the past I used to see the grid was always in the middle. Like, that's the most important thing. And now we clearly see that the customer's like, hey, I want certain things, and I really don't care about dollars per kilowatt hour or MMBTU. I want these 5 things. And now think about it for yourself. What are the 5 things you want? I want convenience, comfort, choice, control, and I want it cost effectively. So when a customer says, I want 21 degrees Celsius, I really don't care how I get it as long as it's convenient and it's cost effective. So no longer are we looking just at one individual source. And as you get that connectivity with the information and control technologies and the devices become connected, we now see where the customer's actually driving the energy industry from a technology perspective. So let's keep looking and see what happens. When you have taken your energy sources and made them more clean, here in Spain you have no more coal. When you have made them more clean, when there's efficiencies in how we use energies, and by the way, that comes from outside the energy industry. The efficiencies are in solid state devices, in nanotechnologies, in carbon nanotube technologies, things that make devices much more efficient. When you get those two, we come up with something that we say is efficient electrification. It used to be called beneficial electrification, but we want to say efficient because you should always try not to use it first and then use it most effectively if you are. So if we have this connected grid, we have these energy sources that are interdependent, we have information technologies that have connected everything, and we have cleaner energy that we can use less of. We wanted to see from a customer perspective what the future looked like. What would happen in 2050 if we looked at the lowest cost option to the customer? So looking at it from the customer's perspective with the lowest emissions from the customer perspective. We call that final energy. So if you're in your home, you would see this as you've turned on your stove, you've used your water heater, you've gotten into your car, you've heated your home. That's the kind of energy that we're looking at. So we did this assessment just for the US on a total average. These are the kind of end uses that we looked at. You can see that from a consumer perspective, your highest use of energy is your transportation or your vehicle. That's the cars and the light trucks. The second highest use is space heating. This is on an average. And then we go to lighting and appliances and industrial processes. If you look at the colors, the light part is some kind of fossil fuel. The green is bioenergy. The yellow is natural gas, and the blue is electricity. So this is what the end-use energy sector looks like. So if we want to look at what happens for this chart, which we're going to look at in a minute, when you try to put the least cost and the most clean as the final use, we'll see what that does. So we looked at 4 cases. It's really funny. For those of you, and you're all technical, most people use 3. You know why EPRI doesn't ever use 3 cases? Because somebody will say, they predict the average, the middle case. So we always do 4, so nobody can pick which one. So that's what we do. So we picked, there's a couple of cases here. This is from the Energy Institute in US, and that's the annual energy outlook that they put out every year. So the conservative case says, gosh, not much work being done on battery storage for cars, so not much advancements in the technology, and the energy efficiency is kind of what this report says, which EPRI believes is way low. We think that the advances in energy efficiency will be much, much greater. Then we take the reference case, which says, well, we think the technology advances pretty fast in energy efficiency and in transportation, and by the way, we're going to see a lot lower use. Then we tack on top of that, don't change the technology, don't change the energy efficiency, and now put a carbon price around, for us it was around $15 a ton starting in 2020, rising at 7%. And that's the progressive case. And then you get to the transformative case, $50 a ton, rising 7% to 2050. The idea was we expected to get a spectrum to be able to see an inflection point in electricity and gas and what happened. So here's what we saw. If you look at final energy and you just looked at the growth because of population and the gross national product, you would see an energy energy use at final energy continuing to go up. In the past, that was always the case. Every utility company said, am I going to have 2% growth or 3% growth? And that was the normal. But that's not happening now. So then you take a reduction from that, from things like economic and market changes. Say that a particular area moves away from industrial and agricultural to services. They have an organic, inside that particular society or a particular region, they have a reduction in electricity just because of the changes in the kind of industry that they're using. Then you have efficiency improvements. TVs use less energy, your cell phones use less energy, everything uses less energy, water heaters, dishwashers. And then you have certain things are electrified, and just by that virtue of being electrified, the amount of energy that is used or consumed is less because of what electricity is replacing. So what we see then is actually a reduction. So this is the total energy. You start to see a reduction for the first time. This is really unusual in the use of energy. And this is in a case where you have a world's population of 7 billion people rising to 9 billion by about this time frame. So how in the world could energy go down? Now let's look at what happens to this piece right here. This is the electric piece, and there is a slight increase. Remember, these are the reductions. So you look at, let's just get all of this here. Oops. So what we see is in the reference case, remember the reference case is pretty much a lot of technology from cars, no extra carbon prices, only use the regulations that are in place. And energy efficiency is pretty aggressive. So you're thinking that you're going to dampen down the use of energy with higher energy efficiency. If I break this little blue piece out, that becomes this. You see that you still have electrification. This right here is just normal. It's continuing. What you see is a little bit of increase in electrification in industry and buildings and a very large increase in electric vehicles. What that does is says that the electric generation goes up 32%. Now this is the opposite of what utilities in the U.S. were predicting. They're predicting that their load is going to go down. Now this is at the end use. Okay, now let's take and add on top the $50, because this is kind of the low end. Let's add the $50 a ton for carbon. And what you see is that industry and buildings have even more transformative, moving to electricity, displacing some oil and petroleum and some biomass, wood products. And you see a 52% growth of the percentage of electricity of the final energy. That's not a 52% in total energy. This is the aha. We were totally surprised, is that across every one of those scenarios, we saw the total energy go down. So even with an increase in population, people are using more electricity, but it's more efficient, and it's replacing less efficient ones. Total energy, oil, gas, electricity, all go down. The electric load actually goes up as a percentage of final energy. Natural gas actually goes up because it's cleaner during that time frame. Even here in Spain, you see where natural gas is looked at as being a little cleaner fuel than what coal was. So people are using more natural gas. This is at the end use. And economy-wide, the CO2 went down in every single case. That was not what you expect when you take the scenarios that are that far apart. So if that's the case, this becomes one of those no regrets. Why aren't we moving to electrify with the cleaner fuels that we currently are producing electricity? What's happening is people are seeing this, and you are seeing a tremendous amount of growth in different electro technologies, whether it's electric vehicles, advanced manufacturing like 3D printing, which is using much less materials, much less energy, indoor agriculture, 90% reduction in water, 90% reduction in land use, and producing crops much faster, especially the short leafy ones. We just talked recently, Arcadia, about 2 seconds ago, about port electrification. And of course, this is where you look at the gantry cranes, the mobility on the port to move things around, and some of the fueling mechanisms. And then of course, residential heating, we're trying to look at hybrid heating sources that use a combination of gas and heat pumps so that you get the most efficient depending on how deep your your temperatures go. All right, so now let's look at what happens if that's true in the scenario. This is the block I showed you before, okay? So here's the transportation sector. Remember, it's all gray because that's what we're showing as the gas and oil and petroleum. You see the space heating. Yellow is natural gas. So we see an electricity use in today of around 3,000 terawatt hours. And we see a final energy of around 60 quads, the emissions around 5,200 million tons, and the average household expenditure. I haven't shown you this before. So remember, we're trying to look at scenarios to reduce the cost to the consumer while decreasing emissions. So this is what it looks like today. Let's look at it tomorrow. So the dotted lines are everything that goes down. So that goes down. I'm going to go back and forth here in a minute. You see that the electricity in terawatt hours actually goes up. Natural gas goes up. Household expenditures go down. Now I'm going to just go back and forth so you can see this. So what you see is a tremendous amount of reduction in energy from transportation, and you see a lot more blue. See the gray? A lot more blue in the transportation for electricity. You also see a very small increase in space heating because that market is primarily dominated by gas, and in the U.S., gas is around $4 an MMBTU, sometimes $3, and we project that out. So super low gas prices for the length of this. So this is another aha moment. So you see this convergence. So that was the kind of the summary, is that in every scenario, emissions goes down. Every scenario, it costs less for the consumer. Every scenario, total energy goes down. And what I didn't also show you is that the gross national product of the country actually went up. Because sometimes you can reduce so much that your gross product doesn't go up. Now, the caveat is nobody's going to see that exactly. Why? Because every region is different. If we were to take every state in the United States or every country in Europe, they would all have a different infrastructure, because we counted the fact that we didn't have to build a lot of infrastructure for transmission or gas or have stranded costs, because that's part of the cost that goes in here. If you have new capital, you've got to put that in the cost to the consumer. So the point is that all of these things make a difference. We're now embarking on a much granular by state, and then Canada has asked to have a couple provinces that look at this as well. So we're going to look at those on a case-by-case. That will help the regional areas plan a little bit better and see what the advantages and disadvantages are. So this was quite a seminal piece of work for EPRI that was released April of this year, and has gotten, actually, we've gotten a lot of attention worldwide. There are some industries, now I'm going to tell you a caveat. So we work closely with the gas industry, and they did a report that didn't show this. Why? Not because they're political, not because they wanted to sell more gas, because there are some regulators who saw this and said, well, if a little bit of electricity is good, then a lot must be good. So let's just say that all houses can't have any more, new houses can't have gas, and that gas has to be out of all new homes in 5 years. So the gas company, the gas advocacy group, ran a scenario with those assumptions, and we totally agree with them. If you run those assumptions and you force it out ahead of its time, you will have stranded gas pipelines, increased cost to consumers, more electricity needs than you have infrastructure for, thereby adding more capital costs. So we do see that, depending on the assumptions, this says let the market play. Let's go the least cost to the consumer and reduce the emissions. So another thing, we talked about the integrated grid. We talked about the integrated energy network. So integrated grid, two-way power flow. Integrated energy network, you combine that integrated grid with the information and control technologies that are coming out, communication. And now you've got to add the customer in there. And we have what's the shared integrated grid. So this is the next evolution. And what does that mean? This is the first time that we've actually seen technology help more economically disadvantaged as opposed to those that have discretionary income and can buy the trinkets. So let me run this through you for a minute. There's a new value stream. If you've been to your hardware store or looked at appliances lately, every appliance can be wirelessly or internet connected. Your phone is connected. You have an app for everything. Your solar panels are connected. If you have storage, your car is connected. Everything is connected. Well, what does that mean? If there was a way to combine those to help those connected devices from the consumer provide grid support, like voltage control or frequency response, then the consumer could get paid for that. And the utility would be able to have some additional services to help their grid services. Now, how does that work? Let's say my hot water heater goes out. I pull up my app and it says the utility company, whether that's a distribution system operator or a third-party aggregator, it says you can buy one of these 4 water heaters. And if you do buy this more efficient one that's controllable, I'll give you $1,000 off. But for that, you have to let me control it within these parameters. So there's some folks, like in the US, there's pilots that go on that say, you can control my water heater plus or minus 10 degrees. You can control my heating and cooling plus or minus 4 degrees. So now the customer gets to buy their material, their product, their appliance cheaper. They get to have it operated when needed by the grid. The grid can avoid putting in other equipment, and they get to run this system for demand-side management as well as resiliency. So this is something we're seeing pilots in Europe. Ireland is one, as well as in the U.S. So the shared integrated grid is now becoming, I think, much more of a reality because of the other things that we have. So let me give you an example. I'll just pick up one. Here's a campus. A college campus decides to install a microgrid. They want the microgrid may be used for resilience. Say that there's a storm and the power is out, and this is the emergency shelter where people will go. They now have power because of the grid. Instead of having to strengthen the system around that college because it's going to be the emergency shelter, they can actually share those costs with the utility and avoid them having to strengthen the transmission or distribution system closer to the microgrid and help pay for the microgrid to the college. The same thing can be done on smaller scales for residentials. All right, remember we said integrated grid, two-way power flow, then in comes advances in information technology that lets us hook everybody together, and now that everybody's hooked together, the customer wants a piece of that action, so we have the shared integrated grid, but EPRI's always looking out a little bit farther. So you probably saw announced about 6 months ago, Apple's new, it's called the A11 Bionic chip. So it has a processor in there that we didn't think, general scientists, did not think that that processing capability would be available for another 5 to 10 years. It now, what was called the A10 Fusion, this is the A10 Bionic chip, it now is 90 times faster than the one that's currently in your iPhone. This is in the iPhone 10 now. The other one in the iPhone 8 is now 90 times faster. We're watching big data and sensors. We're taking data seconds apart, trillions of data in a 5-minute interval. What are we going to do with all that? How do you manage all that? And the way that we did it before, by taking all the data in and averaging it, doesn't work. So you have this whole Internet of Things combined with all the sensors, with can you imagine every person's washing machine and appliance and phone and car all connected? And in fact, in this particular case, we have 200 billion emails going out a day over the internet. Google has only been around for 10 years. 10 years. I know all of you were born since then, so you've all seen that. And we have 2 billion videos being sent out every single day. So we've got this big analytics. We now also see faster wireless communication. Almost all of you will have 5G probably at your homes in the next 2 years. And then we have, you remember IBM Watson when he played chess against the chess master, Big Blue? So you're seeing mainstream analytics, machine learning. What does that have to do with electricity? Because all that now, and energy, is now going to be applied to energy. So let me just give you an example. You have linemen and crews that go out to look at the transmission system. It takes right now 100,000 processors to equal 1 second of a human brain's computation. So how are we going to harness some of the computational capability we got on that last slide? So here's an example. You have an algorithm that says, I want to see if the transmission pole needs to be replaced. Is it tilting? Is it broken? And so I get lots and lots of pictures of transmission poles. And oh, by the way, Google is doing that every single time you Google something. They're using that for AI. So I'm going to take that algorithm and I'm going to train it. And I'm going to say, and here's data. Let's see if that algorithm can identify that as a transformer with three insulators on top. Let's see if it can identify this as a tripole, and you test it. And then you also run test case. And this is how you train those algorithms, and that's called artificial intelligence. You take lots and lots of data, you train the algorithm to where it can recognize this. Let me give you an example. This is a deteriorated wood pole topped with a transformer, our top transformer on top. If you don't have enough data, when you put this through an algorithm, it'll say it's a broken stoplight. And so what you want is, see, you guys are like, what a stupid computer. That's because your brain is so much better than a computer. But this is what artificial intelligence is about, is helping them get enough data that they can mimic the cognitive ability that you have to differentiate between them. Now, once you do this, if I've taken a picture of this, I don't have to send a lineman out until I know that I want to repair it. So now you're talking about increases in resiliency and reduction in cost. In analytics and AI, it's been used everywhere. It was really interesting. I talked to a real estate agent. They're like, oh yeah, we're using AI. I'm thinking, what are you using AI for? You're selling houses and condos and apartments. What they used it for was they looked at all these realtor sites across the world. They looked at the pictures that the real estate sites had for the houses, whether the house was at night, lit up with pretty lights, whether it was in the daytime, whether they took angled shots, they took all this. And then they did analytics to determine which kind of pictures did the houses sell more and faster. And so they redid their real estate marketing to match those pictures. So if people bought houses when they liked the pretty lights outside, they made all their houses have pretty lights outside. So they used it in AI. Google uses it, the banking industry uses it, and now the energy industry is using it for asset management. Customer service, that's you. You probably have AI analysis done on you 3 to 4 times a day. Every time you open your iPhone, every time you Google, every time you buy something, somebody's tracking all of that data. I don't know how many of you use Amazon to buy. Does any of you use Amazon? Right? You ever wonder why, when you haven't bought something, pictures like pop up the next time you open up Amazon? They're tracking you with the AI. They know what you like to buy. now that we've got all this stuff connected and we have this AI, artificial intelligence, and we're going to share our devices with the utility company, and we're going to get lower cost power and cleaner air, and we're living in happy, happy land, along comes resilience, which means I need to be able to stay up, to recover when something bad happens. And these are the kind of things that can impact that happy little world I just talked about. Electromagnetic pulses from a high altitude nuclear detonation, a coordinated physical assault, a seismic attack, hurricanes, storms, snow, could all hurt that little world I just talked to you about. What I want to talk to you about is with the data connection, the connection we have. Let's just talk about cyber terrorism right now for a second. We have created a world that everybody gets to play in the sandbox, and that's a good thing and a bad thing. Because now we've got homes, we've got distributors, we've got microgrids, we've got third-party aggregators, we've got the system operator, we've got the transmission system, we've got the utility owner, and it's all separate so that everybody can play. That means every single one of these is an attack vector to the cybersecurity. It means that every one of these can impact the rest of this. Let me give you an example. Let's see if I put it in here. Yeah, let's give you an example over here. There's a smart inverter, because you know if you have solar on top of your house and the grid goes down, you can't use it unless you have a smart inverter that can island it from the grid so you can use the power. The smart inverter can say, oh, you know what, there's too much power on the grid, you need to island yourself and shut off. Or it can say, you need to provide reactive power. What if someone took control of every single smart inverter and said, ignore that thing about getting off the grid and just go ahead and pump it on there? It will burn up the distribution line. That's bad because that means the relays didn't work. You want things to disconnect so you can put them back together again. You don't want them to burn up. So now we have to look at smart inverters. Do you know how many companies are selling smart inverters right now? Cyber threats on oil and gas. Cyber threats on nuclear. How do we protect and safeguard the nuclear power plants? Anything that has IoT or anything that has information and communications technologies is suspect. I think I'm going to come back. So one thing you might want to Google, spy chips. Last week, first time ever. Bloomberg announces, can I borrow your pen?
Yeah.
Opening up the pen, up. Your pen's too
like
big, your
this.
pen's too big. Okay, the very tip of this pen is the size of a chip that they say they found in iPhones. It's called a spy chip, and it operates between, it's the first time, as opposed to just attacking the software, it attacks the board, the motherboard or the baseboard, and can intercept the signal that controls the wireless. Apple and Microsoft are both saying that isn't true, but the fact is they did find a chip in those devices that was not supposed to be there. So now we have cybersecurity. Can you imagine all of the exported and imported devices you'll have in your home? Every washer, every dryer, everything that's connected. So this is now a very, very, very big area in every single government, in every single place in the world that has to look at this is a new resiliency issue now that we've connected all of our electricity. Not to leave you on a bummer, there's always going to be threats. The threat is always going to grow. Our job is to be able to anticipate them and to minimize them and understand how we can live within them, make the system resilient. And the integrated grid is what's going to give all of the consumers a lower cost, cleaner air, and hopefully a more convenient world. So thank you. And I'll take any questions.
Thank you.
Okay. Thank you very much, everyone. You scare us a little bit, no? You scare us a little bit with the sample of the tip, no? Well, okay, thank you very much for this outstanding presentation. This is the time for questions or whatever about the states or about these scenarios you gave us before, no? Maybe with time we could change these scenarios or not from the States.
Oh, heavens, time will always change.
Yeah?
Time always changes, yes.
No, I'm talking about politics in the state, the climate Trump.
I know I'm ignoring that. I'm trying to dodge that question.
Because in all the scenarios is going down, the CO2 emission in the States, all the scenarios, the electricity is going up. And all the
So, in
scenarios,
fairness, politics aside,
yeah?
even without regulation, carbon continues to go down
Go down.
because the customers want it, and the utilities are seeing that it costs them more. I'm sorry, that's actually a good business decision.
Yeah, sure.
Now, it's just a matter of how fast you would shut the coal plants. You've already shut down all of your coal plants. I think that's the issue. But the carbon is going down in spite of any politics, pro or con.
Okay.
Is that a good answer?
It's a good answer. Okay, it's time for the floor to ask something to her about this. You can download later on this presentation we will have on our web. Here you are.
Jaime Segarra,
Okay.
good morning or almost good afternoon. First of all, thank you and congratulations for your very exciting perspective exercise. I have a couple of areas that I would like to, I would appreciate very much to have your comments. The first one is that all this process that I'm absolutely convinced is the direction we are all driving in is highly dependent on capital availability. When you consider the necessary investments in terms of renewable penetration, in terms of artificial intelligence, in terms of big data analysis, network integrations, and even financing to convince customers that that's the way to go and that this is paying off. Don't you think that there could be a throttling of the process because of lack of sufficient capital? That's the first question. The second one is that a large part of this depends on the availability of a massive amount of data. Don't you think that there is a possibility that the users of the data will rebel against free use of their data? They will ask for compensation to allow that their data are available to suppliers of services?
Oh, is this still?
Yeah, this is working. This is working.
Is this working?
You're still working.
Still? This one?
Thank you.
Okay.
She has finished.
Thank you for those questions. I think you are absolutely right on both accounts. In the case of throttling back without having enough capital, what we've shown here is the comparison of different futures and which is the least cost future to the consumer. To be able to have that evolve, the different investors overall have got to find the capital. And the trouble is that the benefits for that least cost is to the consumer, not always to the person who's having to find the capital. And that will definitely throttle back. However, what we're finding is that that most companies that own assets have capital. They just need to help prioritize it. So if you were to look at this scenario versus a scenario where my electric grid's not going to grow, I would divest and I would let the grid deteriorate. This says if you have capital, you probably need to focus more on investing in the grid rather than your generation sources. And that's where this helps inform the decision. But you are correct on the capital and who pays. On the and the second subject was the data.
Data availability.
So right now, it's a trade. Let's talk at the corporate level versus the individual level for privacy. So at the corporate level, where someone may own lots of transmission data, it is only to their benefit to combine data. And that's one thing EPRI is doing, is working with asset owners to combine transmission pole data, SCADA data, operational data from nuclear plants. And when you combine them all together, then that artificial intelligence is much brighter and can help everyone. So they are willing to share that data. On the privacy part, it is very interesting. There have been studies shown, because we thought, we've done pilots where we say, let us have access to your appliance, to your hot water heater, and to your refrigerator. And without fail, there were 4 pilots, I think, without fail, the customer said, only if you let me see what you're seeing. So if I can on my app see what you're seeing, then you can have my data. That wasn't expected at all. But I think you're right. I think data is going to become, it's going to become a commodity, it's going to become a value stream, and people will start wanting a cost to take their data. Yeah.
Some more questions to Ante? You have two people there.
Federico.
Encourage them.
No, perfect.
Good afternoon. Thank you. Very interesting. My name is Federico Delgado. My question is regarding with self-generation and self-consumption. Inside of this scenario, what is the role that EPRI expected for this? How we improve that? And what will be the role of the big generation?
So the question was about self-generation and consumption versus a larger utility. What EPRI sees is that in order to enable, we see both. The lowest cost is both, because in order to enable the greatest value from the distributed energy resources at the consumer and the greatest value for the utility or the larger bulk generation, we see you need an integrated grid to balance. From a individual perspective, you will never use the power that you generate at exactly the same time in exactly the same amount as you generate it. And since electricity is perishable, unless you put it into an energy storage device, you need to have a way to balance that. And so you want to put it back on the grid and have somebody pay you for the excess generation you have. And in those days when you don't have generation, you want to be able to buy some. So we definitely see that there's a role for the self-generation as well as the utility. And the shared integrated grid says, oh, it's not just about us sharing generation, like we'll be the utility will be the balancing authority for whenever you don't have any at your home. We think we can combine it together and get even greater benefits, and we're willing to pay you for it. Frequency control, voltage response, reactive power, that those things are valuable and can be supplied by the distributed energy resource.
Okay.
Well, my name is José, and for your nice presentation. My question is, this presentation, which I read a lot of things from EPRI, especially the United States National Energy Assessment, the analysis is quite based in the United States, in the American energy outlook. Is EPRI doing something how to extrapolate things to the world energy outlook? Because things are different. For instance, energy efficiency concept in America is quite different from the energy efficiency concept in the Horizon 2020 and the European one. And probably it's quite different what the Chinese people think about energy efficiency in building. And is EPRI doing something outside United States to compare all
services worldwide,
to expand all these studies to worldwide?
Yes, so the question was, are we doing, this was very dependent upon the U.S. situation, and the answer is absolutely, we're looking outside the U.S. But let me state, even within the U.S., it is very different from region to region to region. In areas that have a lot of district heating, which there's not a lot in the U.S., except in the New York, the Northeast, that answer is going to be very different. What this has said, though, is that there is a combined future with these technologies, integrated grid, integrated energy network, shared integrated grid, and the information technologies that will lead you to say that electricity and gas in the short term are cleaner options to give you the least cost. We have talked to a couple of utilities and members of ours in Latin America, in Korea. Canada looks like they will be moving forward with a couple of provinces. So we are trying to get a broader base, and thank you for asking that. It'll be different wherever you are.
Okay, some more questions to Ante? In the back, over there.
Well, first of all, thank you very much for your presentation. My name is Delgado. I've seen different technology developments and new players coming down to these new energy models. I mean, manufacturers are developing VPPs based on their knowledge on hardware controlling in factories and so on. Different startups making also very interesting solutions for to participate as aggregators. and also utilities by investing, acquiring companies, and also with their own development. I would like to know your opinion about this new ecosystem and new companies playing different roles in these energy scenarios. Do you think something is going to change? Because now utilities are mostly managing the whole thing, but in the future it seems that other players will play a role in this new ecosystem.
So, so I think the question was about new players and how are those new players play in this type of future?
Google or whatever.
Right, Google or whatever.
New commercialization companies. Or
So from an EPRI perspective, I'll start from the technology and innovation first, and then EPRI doesn't define or predict market models, but I can answer your question, I think, or at least inform it. If you look at what's happening, at some point, by the end user, you will need a distribution energy resource management system, something that can take all those individual pieces, all that data, and pull it together. That's going to require some type of common communications protocol and architecture platform for that to work on. Now, the question that you're asking then is, what role does everyone play? The fact that you need what we call a DERMS, a distribution energy resource management system, can be used or owned by anyone. It can be a third-party aggregator. It can be done with equipment at a substation owned by the DSO. It can be done at the transmission system operator if they get the data from the distribution. It can be done by a community. So the answer is there is always a place in a free market for multiple different parties to participate. The challenge comes is what is best for the consumer. Because if you aggregate some things, does it make a monopoly in which the customer doesn't have choice? Does choice always lead to lower cost? We all know that's not true. And so I think the answer technologically is these things I've described have to happen. Who owns them and who runs them will be left to the individual market and regulatory environments.
And some more question, or there are new roles in the States, for instance in California, no, with the local communities, with these new things.
With microgrids,
Yeah,
yes,
sure.
yes.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Anda, for coming here. Thank you very much. We will give her an applause for our side.
Thank you very much.
Okay.